First, I'm going to get you guys to introduce yourselves, to start this off. A little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we can just dive straight into our session.
Hi, I'm Matthew Hawn. I am the CEO of Fictioneers, which is a company that has spun out of a UKRI research project a couple of years ago called Audiences of the Future. And we're going to be talking a little bit about probably more the commercial side of this, the commercial end of this, and how people are using immersive technology maybe at a more commercial level. We were acquired a couple of years ago by WPP, the big advertising agency, so we've kind of got this interesting research become very commercial very fast. So I'll be leaning on some of that, but equally some of the things we've learned as we've been building software to support some of the experiences we're talking about today.
I'm Thomas Florence, I'm artistic director of But Why, and we've made kind of in-person stuff, and we were just starting as a third company when lockdown happened, but I was doing a bunch of research into like alternative reality games and other things, so I kind of brought to the fellow creatives and went, well, rather than this just being users onboarding, maybe we could use this as an entire show. We did quite well and became award-winning because of that, and we're kind of, if essentially I'm going to teach you today what you could do with his tech if I knew it existed.
Amazing. So let's. I think we should start off with Thomas. You've actually created ARG experience, which we sort of seeded out, and you may have seen some sort of nudges towards it around the venue. But do you want to give us a quick overview of what that is, how people can get involved in it if they haven't already, and then maybe on to sort of how you created it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, now you will need to test your powers of observation for how many clues have been hidden around this event for my show. Yeah, so essentially, obviously, we kind of hit you guys up to create the experience, and alternative reality games are interesting for the fact that they're very blending reality and fantasy. So the whole point of an alternative reality game is, first of all, it's transmedia, so you're using websites, using other things, but rather than it being an immersive experience where obviously you'd buy a ticket, you know what you're getting into, the whole kind of aspect of an alternative reality game is to kind of convince you that this is reality, which comes with its kind of own ethical implications.
We'll get onto those.
Yeah, well, most definitely, yeah. But yeah, so for this, I'd created another show, which was kind of a self-working kind of ARG element show, which was called Call to Adventure, and it was kind of taking the idea of like the hero's journey and like you actually take these steps and move on it. So I already had the asset for the Cerebral Court of Knights, which is kind of this idea of like, you know, the Holy Knightsman said it's the adventures of the mind. So I already had some pre-made assets for that, and I thought of something which could move you around the space. So that was what I stuck with and thought it would work well because it would look like a sponsor and blend in. And then from there, I create this idea of basically how I could hook you with something interesting. So the idea of this kind of mysterious magical disease called forget-me-nots, if any of you noticed that around the space, it looked like some kind of thing. Yeah. Essentially, if you process memories, if you have issues processing memories, it's because you kind of can't assess what is reality and what isn't. And I thought that'd be quite a useful thing, being in of itself an interesting plot device, but also quite cleverly meta when talking about alternative reality. So yeah, if you want to perform the experience afterwards, get the QR and you can move around the space and you have to kind of save someone's memory. I don't want to give too much away, so ...
What was your process, Tom, in terms of sort of creating that ARG, both from a creative point of view, in terms of how did you design that narrative, design that piece of work, and then what were the tools that you used to then produce it?
Yeah, so I guess if we just kind of talk about alternative reality games in general for a minute, which is that it's kind of always, if you look at the history of it, it's really interesting. There was a show by, it's an experience by EA Games. It was called Majestic, and that was years ago, and that was kind of like a monthly subscription-based thing. And that in of itself was a whole alternative reality game, but because of variations of like real-world events and other things, it kind of fell through. So that is something that not many people know about historically, which is interesting because it's kind of coming back round again. Because the other angle was that the big-scale ones, I mean, you said you had background in music, and 9 Inch Nails did a massive one, which was to advertise an album. Another one was for The Dark Knight, so they basically built Gotham Online, and these websites were happening in real time. So there's always been this kind of notion of using it to kind of advertise a product or advertise, and it's kind of coming back around to the Majestic days of this in of itself might be an experience. So I guess that's your base, because if I'm building an alternative reality game either for a client or onboarding in our own shows, that's slightly different because you're kind of thinking about the rules that you kind of want to teach. But when the story's still important, but maybe not as much as keeping you gripped because you know you've got a ticket that you've bought at the end of it, but with using it as the whole base itself, it's thinking about the narrative of it and the interaction elements.
It's interesting. You mentioned Year Zero was Trent Reznor's from 9 Inch Nails thing. In 2007, he made that Year Zero game with 42 Entertainment, pretty big company. And if you ask him, I was working at the record company at the time when he built it, and he said, "This is the product.
Yeah,
this is not the album. Year zero is the thing that I'm making." And he was ahead of the curve. But there are other bands have turned them into marketing things. Boards of Canada did one. There've been several Quest-like things you can do around them. But really, the idea that they were going to be their own experience is still pretty rare. And I think you're right.
Yeah.
It's coming back in the last couple of years. I think there's been a kind of a resurgence of them.
No, totally.
I'm glad to see them come back, and I think the technology is helping us to do that.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So when you emailed us and says, "Hey, why not we do an ARG game?" and we went, "Yeah, sure, why not do that?" What was your next step? How did you? Because if you're writing a theatre show, you write a script.
Yeah.
If you're doing a lighting design, you draw a plan.
Well, as you said, I did it about a week and a half. Timescale's a big one. If we're talking about 42 Entertainment and the stuff they do, that might be hundreds upon hundreds of websites, and you might just have a small team. So the way I look at it is, I've got a weird sort of background. So I started off doing like mind reading and escapology. So the interactive element I knew quite a bit about because I was kind of doing it beforehand.
I mean, that's quite a CV. So
yeah, it's a weird CV, right? Yeah. And then, but the other side is like writing. So as part of my degree, I did writing on the side with theatre. So the idea of like looking at minimalism and the idea of minimalism writing is this whole idea of like, they like to use guns because guns are more exciting, but essentially it's what's known as a hidden gun or hidden object. So if you're only using 2 websites, you haven't got a big team, how can you implement things in that? Which is, a great example of a hidden object would be The Shining, right? First time you read The Shining, watch The Shining, there's a part where they're like, and this boiler, right? If you don't look after it, this whole building will explode. But because they're hiding it amongst other things, you're like, okay, da, da, da. And then at the end when it goes off, you go, of course, I should have seen that. So if you're building 1 or 2 websites, it's creating that user interface that people, there's a mystery, they're intrigued, but in a way that if they learn information from website 2, they can come back to website 1 and see it in a completely different light. So instead of going, down, we can't do 42 Entertainment and 5,000 websites, actually, how can you play with just those 2?
And do you sort of draw that out like a flow diagram in terms of what that audience journey is?
Yeah, so particularly with this one, there are other ones which is a bit more linear. Particularly with this one, I was thinking there's the scavenger hunt element that you guys have to go around. So there'll be a landing page with photos on. These are hidden around the space. But you can do this in any order except number 5, which is kind of the crescendo. So we're having a discussion about that before, that kind of funnel system. You'll start there, you'll end there, but where you go in the middle is the wavy fun part. So yeah, so with that, I kind of built these 5 elements, and I thought, okay, what would you do when you're actually in the space? Because that was another thing as well. I'm getting here this morning, so I couldn't have a whole thing where, I don't know, the puzzle answer is exactly what would be, how many windows are in this room, right? I couldn't necessarily do that. So I was thinking how I would have the page which would have progressing your narrative, asking you to do something for interaction, coupled with what I could do kind of in the space. So that was, I planned out the narrative beats, the interesting parts, and then kind of the puzzles come after. I think that's important as well, because especially with alternative reality games or other things, it's cool to build a puzzle. And I think you were talking about this in the last talk, but it's like, how does that drive the narrative? So if I know that this scene is very poignant and it's about his childhood, and it's something that happens at school, if I can then create a puzzle where the answer to unlock this page is the word school, not only is that creating a puzzle, but actually, if you're hopefully eagle-eyed enough, you go, well, this makes narrative sense. So, yeah.
Amazing. So Matt, so Fictioneers sort of do this kind of at scale in terms of with the software that you built, and one of the big things that you guys were involved in was the Wallace & Gromit Big Day Out in Bristol.
The Big Fix-Up, yeah.
The Big Fix-Up, that's it. Well, how's the creative process behind that? How did they sort of go from that thing of like, let's do a show to, and then that's the implementation of it? Is it flow diagrammed? Is it big stick-it notes or?
But when I first started, when I took this job, I wanted to look at, we did that project, and that has a certain type of approach to it. In 2018, the UK Catapult guys did a look at VR workflows and AR workflows. And the one thing that was kind of common to all of them was there was nothing common to all of them, right? That they were all, it was really hard to understand. Like everyone had a different process they were doing. But one of the things I did over the last one was to break them into 3 categories, three points of an experience. And we'll see if Tom agrees with them or not. But the first one was you really start off by your initial, and it's almost a solo person doing it. You can't do this. The narrative director is what we often call them, but the person who's the auteur, the person who has the vision for the story, they write down the themes, the characters, and the stories. That's what they have to create that first. But once that's out there, that structure, the overarching story, we call it the steel thread that runs through the Big Fix-Up, then you can start to iterate on the interactive side of it, and then you bring in a different group. And so the three stages we have are create, iterate, and operate. We have to think about all 3 of those stages and how do we build all 3 of those. And if you don't do that when you've got it scaled, because when you're a one-man whirlwind like Tom is, and you can do all this stuff yourself, you've got all those roles you're playing all the time. Once you're collaborating at scale with people and you have to do production, it gets really expensive really fast. So if you don't do your planning up front, if you haven't thought through those things, and I'm not saying you're writing this in ink, you're writing it in pencil. Rather, Annie Lamott has the idea of a shitty first draft. And I think that's what this is, right? This is your shitty first draft. Get it out there so you can play with it, and then you can start to collaborate and iterate. And this is where you steal things from the game space, which is, this is about play testing, right? How do you make sure you are testing this thing? So in that second phase, the iterate phase, that's when you start to work through the mechanics of your game. What are the tools? What are the things we need to do? And so you've got this iterate phase when you're collaborating, you're figuring out the production, what assets do I need for this? That's that phase. And then finally, the operate phase is when you move into, now I've got to run this, right? We got to do this. And for us, because this was a personalized experience for everyone who went through it, we had to operate that using some pretty complicated software, right? And that meant keeping track of everyone's user state, and that required us to publish our software to Google Cloud. So we have a very complicated cloud-based system that does all that work, but hides that from the storyteller. And that's the reason we do it that way.
How's that compared to you? Because what I'm interested in is this sort of compare and contrast between the sort of the small and the large scale. It sounds like there's a lot of commonality in that process. It's just potentially a lot more people and more time.
No, totally, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I guess that's immersive. I mean, one of the big things would be, as you're saying, like, because it's cloud-based, there's a lot hidden away. You can kind of do the same, but obviously when you're working more freer assets, you might be kind of more restricted in some respects. But essentially, I mean, that's kind of what, because there's so many different people here who are doing different things, that's essentially what brings us all together, which is it's the individual and then how they respond to A space, B the narrative, and C kind of the scenario. So yeah, within that, that's very similar. As you said, it's the scalability of it as well. Is it a one-player experience? Is it a multiplayer experience? And I think, especially with alternative reality games, that building of community is kind of really fascinating. I mean, when we were building a project just before lockdown, we kind of called it like the anti-loneliness network, because we thought there were these kind of people who were gaming and interested. If you were a bit alone about whatever, it was kind of like hand-holding in there. But I knew people who would be up for solving a fake murder mystery, or like really, not like your Cluedo, but like they'd be going through websites and there'd be an evil killer or that sort of stuff. But at the same time, they were still alone. I think that's the big thing with technology. We don't have someone in front of you, right? Hopefully we're being engaging right now, but the fact that I can look at you is far different than coming across a website. So it's essentially that liveness, I think, is a crucial element, which might be far easier to do if you've got response, which you've got with your software. But actually finding liveness within work of what I do is different. So for example, there might be an audio, but the audio might ask you to do something, and then when you do something, it will respond with an audio cue in it, which hopefully guides you that it's worth playing along, but secondly means you can kind of get some liveness out of pre-recorded assets, essentially.
With digital stories in general, you have to start off early on in that create phase and decide who your audience is and what the role they play. That's the most important thing for me in immersive theater, is how much agency do they have?
Yeah.
In a linear narrative, there's not any. You've got you're following it through. You're following this through on rails, and there might be some choices you might make. Even a choose your own adventure book, you're still on rails that follow you to a certain location. So you're always got that sliding scale in immersive. Like, what is the role of the audience? And you have to decide that up front, right? You have to know who they are.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know who's going to play your game, you just have to decide what role you want them, and you have to guide them to learn how to do that. And that's part of the onboarding process.
Yeah.
Giving them the rules for playing. And you have to know those things up front before you can operate it. When you do operate it, the onboarding of bringing someone into the experience is really important, that you give them those rules so they know, yeah, this is a boxing show, but you can't hit anyone. There's all kinds of things that people will have to be taught how to do before you can bring them into your world. And I think that's different than whatever type of show you're doing. Pick the role of the audience, figure that out, and then the rest of the narrative comes from that.
Yeah, teach them the rules of engagement, definitely. Well, that's the thing. Well, yeah, and it's exactly that. If it's boxing, you don't want to punch him, but then there's kind of the other end of the scale, which is that, because the more kind of theatre background, when we were kind of learning about immersive in uni all those years ago, this one person was like, want to do a really performance arty thing. He's like, I'll go in a room where there'll be all this stuff, and anyone can like do anything they want to me. It'll be a really cutting edge play. It'll be really, and then one of the lecturers just went, but the issue with that is someone tried to do something a bit similar and like kind of edgy a few years ago, but if it's just a room where you can do anything, no one will do anything, because we've got that little bit of anxiety within us that will be like, they'll say you'll pick anything, but actually that one thing I can spank them with, that was a test, which is wrong. They'll stand in the room and not. So actually, by putting in rules, it isn't always to the extreme you're saying don't punch the actors. It's also some people might not even be able to talk to the actors, and that's why ARGs are quite interesting when they are just used as onboarding. Onboarding is an interesting term as well. My friend's dissertation was all on looking at how to create someone ready for an immersive experience before even coming to an immersive experience. When it comes to onboarding, about 5% of the literature is on VR, which is all very new and exciting. 95% is business, which is how do you onboard this person to be the correct person for your job, yada yada. But within that, earlier someone was talking about masks and roles, but essentially, when you go to a job, you are having to portray a character. So is there stuff we can take from corporate world, and actually there are some far more theatrical elements to them.
I take it for role-playing games. Now, if you, how many of you guys are D&D or nerds or role-playing game nerds?
We spoke for 5 minutes already.
Yeah, a few hands up. You've heard of the concept of session zero, right? The idea that how are we going to play this game? When you first start, when you sit down in a room full of people and you're going to say, we're going to sit down and we're going to be elves or wizards or something, you want to set some rules up. And so session zero allows people to set the boundaries of the game you're playing. And I think that's what I mean when I say that if you're going to set up an immersive experience, you have to give people a chance to say how they want to play and how they want to be part of that experience. And if you do that well, that can be the onboarding, and that's actually can be in world, and you can bring them to that. You guys have had Chloe Masheter here before. Chloe's amazing LARP experiences. They make some of the most amazing things. And the very first thing you do with Chloe is you learn how to play the game. And you figure out how you're going to play, and then you move into this world, and that creates the safety and the stuff that I think is really important in ARGs especially. It's like, what are the rules here? What are the elements?
And being able to adapt to that as well, that's what's really interesting. I know some people have built some ARGs and it's got some traction and they've got like a few hundred players or whatever. That's another mad thing about alternative reality games. If you bought an experience, like for an escape room, and you get stuck, right? If you spoke up to the person who's usually on the microphone or whatever and doing an experience, and be like, I'm stuck now. If they went, solve it or the game doesn't continue, you'd want your money back. But with ARGs, they can leave that. They'll leave it with a few hundred players and like a month will pass. So, but this one guy was saying it was a certain way they had to sequence this to get a new code or whatever. And long story short, it's that whole thing of starting to see patterns in toast or whatever. They spend so much time staring at it. They thought it was something to do with them like sending the Twitter account like dog pics or whatever, and the game designer who was doing it found it so hilarious that he just went, I just gave it to him at that point. I was like, yes, that is exactly the puzzle I built, and I just went, here's the link, well done, you did it. And I think that's an interesting thing you can get with the ARGs, and that liveness is, it might not be an actor in front of you live in that aspect, but the fact that people can go, is the puzzle this? And actually, if it doesn't completely ruin, I don't know, a plan and payoff you've got way down the line, you can kind of reward players for being a bit inventive.
Totally. The onboarding thing is really interesting because I've always felt there's a tension between wanting to create an ARG, which is that sort of, it feels like reality, it feels very real, but at the same time, knowing how to onboard someone that's the game, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because there is a part of the, edgy maker that's kind of wants to go, they're going to sign up to say they want to be a part of this, and then out the blue, weeks later, they'll get a random email, which then takes them down a rabbit hole. But then, because I was involved in an ARG doing lockdown, and so many people ignore the email because they just assumed it was spam. There was no way of them knowing that was the way in, if that makes sense. Right. So, but then it feels you're almost like ruining the game to sort of sit down beforehand and say to people like, okay, so this is the game. There feels like there's a real sort of parallel here between live experiences as well. And like you're saying, sort of like, how to onboard someone to a live experience so they know the rules, know the way it is without spoiling it. Do you have any thoughts about any experiences about how you've done it successfully to ARG world?
Yeah. I'm now just trying to think of not like dramatic stories where it's gone terribly wrong and actually come up with
okay, let me turn around, yeah. What should we not do?
Yeah, that's the thing. So I guess it's, as you say, it's the email that's been ignored, or it's getting that kind of balance between maybe your initial email being a tongue-in-cheek enough that people might get it, and then, to use a weird metaphor, slowly remove your tongue from your cheek as you go through. And if that opening one, that was the one we did. We did a horror experience a while ago, and it was over lockdown, so there'll be like phone calls and other stuff, but we kind of gave them like a time zone for them to consent to, so it was like a hard stop at 10 o'clock. If you want to look at ethics, I've got a podcast, and we ended up talking about 3 completely different experiences about ethics. And there was this one by the guy who did some of the Saw films. He's in LA. He did something called The Lust Experience, and that was like a year long. It was actually, like, it ended in a show you meant to buy a ticket, but for a year, because he's got Hollywood money. It was this whole crazy, like, kind of, was it a cult, was it whatever? And people, you get all sorts of stories on the internet saying they were rung up at like 1 a.m. by someone who's like, I'm a serial killer. If you don't get to this exact location the next minute, this person will die. And it's like, what? And so, it's that thing of thinking of not only the time restraint in relation to your show, but the time restraint, how long it's going on for. So if someone signs up for an ARG and it's onboarding for a show, and that show's in a month, you might today be like, I want a 1 a.m. phone call with this mysterious character. Then you get a cold on Wednesday. You're not feeling it by Friday. So it's that updatable, the ability to update your kind of content in relation to it is probably your best. And then you can be edgy and fun and all the good stuff, which you can get with more indie work.
For a commercial thing like the Big Fix-Up, we also had to understand that our first act was going to be an onboarding of how to play and intro to the world, right? So you have to put people in that location. We also allowed people to go back and forth a little bit too and replay some of the aspects of it. So if you missed a piece, and I think that's one of the things about ARGs and big stories, like there were 197 story elements of the Big Fix-Up, and it would be hard to get to all of them. Yeah. I think about 20% of the people did. But the ability for people to go back and find what they missed and find some navigation, it goes kind of against some of the ethos, like you were saying. Like, if you missed it, you missed it. And some FOMO is kind of useful. On the other hand, if you frustrate your players so much, like, you've made it hard to play my game, and I'm not giving you a way through and a pathway through, then it's not a story, it's something else. It's an open world event. And I think for us, we're very much focused, and Fictioneers is designed to tell stories. There's a beginning and a middle and an end to this. And when we say that you can make an open world with our software, that's definitely true. But is that going to be satisfying to your players? I heard someone once talk about, know your ending before you know anything. Know how you want people to end and what you want them to come out on the other side of it. They may take 15 passes to get there, but know how you want them to come through. Genre fiction does this all the time. Romance fiction, there's always a happy ever after in romance books. That's just how they work. And choose your own choice of games makes a really nice choose your own romance kind of path, but you always have a happy ending. So you just choose the element who you want to be part of. And I think that's true for a lot of these things. We expect a resolution. Yeah. We expect to go through this. We expect to, go up and down. And so if we're not careful about how we design those, it's really easy to lose your players and lose your audience.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what you said, that it's that balancing act between, and that's why I bring up horror stuff, because it's kind of the easiest to talk about, it's the balance between tension and fail state. Because you want tension, you don't want it to be a boring scene where it's like, well, you can pick anything, because like if there isn't that fear of loss, then you might not have that excitement. But as you're saying, especially with your multi-directional stuff, there's a replayability to it. So you go, I've got 1 of 3, but I know I can redo this, so I'm going to pick 3, which keeps me engaged, but I'm also not freaking out that I've ruined it forever.
One of the slides we were talking with someone this earlier, and one of the things I came up with actually came from a company called Nonchalance, is the name of the theater company. They use this construct in Nonchalance to come up with the idea that you start off with narrative, because we're wired as humans for narrative. We make sense of the world through narrative, but we learn through play. We learn through mistakes, to be honest, right? It's the place you can mess up. So when you have a narrative and play, and then you add location to it, be that a virtual or local, you have something really powerful. To me, and this is for me is the heart of an immersive experience. Has all these elements to it. So placing me in these 3 places and giving me some agency in the play thing, but also I've got to hold on to the narrative. There's got to be a story for me to follow. Otherwise, I don't know how to play.
I mean, that's what's really interesting about digital stuff as well, is because, as you say about space, right? If you travel to a space, and obviously the big scale immersive stuff, you're going into another world. What's great from like a accessibility point of view, and B, you might respond differently because of where you are. Like, you can play these games from the comfort of your own home. So it's how do we kind of quote, are we like invading that safety or getting that safety exciting by getting a phone call at mysterious time? But at the same time, it's like, but that from being at home, you play in a different way. And I think that's quite interesting of how the players can play differently depending on you invading that location. And who
it's really important. Like that, sorry to interrupt on this.
No, this is really
useful thing to think about, because location, we want to go to authentic places. I mean, this is a metaverse slide before Mark Zuckerberg screwed it up. But really, when we talk about this, we've been after authentic places where we can be with other people and connect with other people. And in an ARG or in a story game, like we are still trying to do that, right? So one of the things we're working on right now is how do you play with other people? In an ARG, the way you look for clues together, like, I can't solve this puzzle, maybe somebody else out there can. And that's a huge part of the way ARGs are played, are not in the game, but in the communities around them, in the wiki that springs up, in the message boards that spring up. That's where the game happens.
This is amazing. I mean, obviously these guys can talk for ages, which is great. I fully recommend finding the corner of the bar they're going to end up in later and just picking the brains. Can I talk about some of the tools that we use? And there's one specific thing which is, I don't know, everyone's favorite topic at the moment, but the new AI tools that are coming along. So when we were sort of playing with our ARG thing, sort of a friend of mine, incredibly clever creative designer, put together an amazingly good ARG experience using a combination of Google Sheets as the brain, Zapier as the glue, and Twilio for comms. And anyone who wants to create something like this, Twilio is a great tool for doing like text messaging, phone calls, voicemails. It's just a great, because you can basically automate it through Zapier to talk to loads of other things. Really, really fun. And he would create in Zapier these conversation flows where you are doing, exchanging messages with someone, and he would script it so that really there was only one answer to what they asked you. So therefore you could sort of, it felt like a conversation, but actually you're being very sort of like, it was very sort of linear. ChatGPT comes out and we're sitting there kind of going, oh my God, like if we could limp into this suddenly becomes, it begins to open that world up, begins to sort of, make that a little more real. Have you guys started to experiment with some of these tools that are out there? Do you use them in some of the work that you're doing? What is the future of where that thing's going?
I mean, that's a massively open-ended question because of everything that it could. I mean, Zapier is one, and there's elements of Zapier within the ARG if you do it today. But the reason I kind of came across that was a good while ago now. Someone just around about ChatGPT came out, went, "I've built this awesome tool." He stuck it in like an immersive Facebook page or something, and he was like, what you do, it's a little Google form, put your name, a celebrity you've always wanted a letter to, and like a little title or whatever. So some people were like playtest it for it, and other people immediately got into that, well, you're putting a right out of a business, yada yada kind of experiment, which are very valid and very, but people's art being stolen. But then I guess there's a flip side to it too, which is that like we've done shows before we had automated stuff, and it's us and like our 5 actors or whatever, and those like post-show messages you've got, people probably checking out, oh, they're using Zapier. We were like handwriting every single one of them, and I want to be and continue to be a professional writer, but if some of it could be put out because of that.
But not necessarily just the writing book, just using it as a way of building a character.
Yeah, no.
As part of your story.
I've asked ChatGPT to write me ARGs before just to see what happens. And it'll be like, dark room. In this dark room, there is a puzzle. Once they've solved this puzzle, they will move into the spooky room. Inside the spooky room is a puzzle.
So these tools are only as good as the people who put things into them. And this is why I'm not really worried that any of the writers and people in this room are going to be out of work because of these tools. It's going to change how we work. There's no question. It's already changing how we work, right? I mean, I think the large language models, which most of these things are based on, are quite good at pulling in lots of information, and the ethics of that are really not lost on me. It comes down to this really good quote from Jim Jarmusch, right? He says that artists steal from everywhere. We've always stolen from things. That's how artists are thieves. We're all thieves. Where you steal from matters. What you steal from, how you choose it. Machines don't choose what they steal from. ChatGPT didn't say, I really want to steal that quote and I want to mimic that because I love that story. There's no soul to a machine. Everybody has a reason why they took from something. We always take. It's where you take it to that matters. And that's the Jim Jarmusch quote, which said it much better. Read that later on when you get a chance. But for me, that's what these tools are good at, right? These tools are good at for being a way to iterate quickly, a way for you to, when we experiment with it right now, and we're not asking it to write text. We actually do a little text and some image stuff. But what we really did first was, how does this help me shape the story? Because they're really good at that, especially when I've got a complicated multi-branching story. We actually used it to write me a story that does a root and branch style schema. They're really good at that. It's a really good way to do that. And now I can go back and I can edit that and I can fix it. So use those tools. And I'm not stealing a work from somebody. I can be unique. The other area I think we are going to see it come is in character. And if you get a chance to play with In-World, they're free. They have a free tool you can play with called the Character Studio. And you can go online and you can make a chatbot. And you can give it motivations, you can give it all these things. And it'll take you about 20 minutes to do it. And what's great about that is that you have to make all the decisions, right? You have to decide all the things that anyone does when they write. What does this character care about? What do they love? All those things, you have to provide those. You're not going to get that out of the AI to do that for you. So ultimately, if you use this as a tool to refract back the experiences and things you're trying to do, it can be very powerful. It's an iteration tool. As the end result, I mean, you guys have seen the results of it. They're going to get better. They're going to keep getting better. But then everyone has that tool. What are you going to do differently? Where are you going to take these things to? And what is your experience going to be different? Because a million monkeys with typewriters might be able to do Shakespeare, but I don't want to go through that slush pile. No thanks.
I mean, that was the biggest thing. If we want to go down that route, let's not go on about the strikes. But one of the biggest thing in that they were trying to get was that it wasn't so much they were putting out a business, but the idea that a bunch of Hollywood producers could go write as an action film, spit out 60 pages, and then give it to an actual writer and go, now make that work. Like, and if you're doing it in a way that you want to, that's totally fine. Also,
and the strike actually made them not do it. That's exactly what they did. Which
summary striking works. That's what. Remember anything from the ARG? Fight the power.
But there's also aside from ChatGPT, there's other things like I think we were having a conversation before, and you were saying so there's a great website called This Person Does Not Exist.
Yeah, thispersondoesnotexist.com's great because it just generates a face that's completely random, so you can use it. That works with like horror experiences also. You know, if you've got like this child is missing and you must hunt them down, it's a bit weird to like ring up your aunt and be like, can I use my cousin in it? So instead just generate this person doesn't exist and you've got that face forever. I mean, that's the thing as well. It's the whole ethical thing. It's when we're talking about image generation, this whole one went viral where, because obviously it kind of makes a pastiche of things. There was a pastiche of a Getty image copyright logo. So it's like, oh, okay, we might know where you've been pulling those photos from. But with This Person Doesn't Exist, I think it was some university that like create this algorithm off a bunch of people's faces who consented. So, I mean, with like a lot of things, it's the consent.
Cool. I'm really going to look at the time. I'm really keen to get into questions. Anyone got any questions they want to start shoot from? Yeah, do you want to start here? And then the next one will be over here.
I might be a good client for you. I actually am the business and creative producer for Donnie Darko, the theatre show. Basically, we're talking about a theatre show, 3 hours, immersive. I think that storyline of Donnie Darko allows me to use all different types of technical wizardry. But one of the things I think is important that I'm trying to bring in is that whole world of AR, VR, AR, and bring the story narrative 6 months before the actual show is launched, more as a minimal viable product. The beautiful thing with Donnie Darko is it's such a huge cult fan base and it's been dormant for 20 years. So I think it's a good time to bring it back. People love 80s nostalgia. The whole film is set in 1988, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, for example, you know, the story of Donnie Darko being primary universe to tangent universe, it's like, could you start a VR experience or an AR experience, say in Trafalgar Square, where people have their phones and they're trying to find a jet engine, and when they do, it takes them online to the website, and then we start our metaverse, and then get those hardcore Donnie Darko fans around the world starting to hear about it and then seep it in to eventually we get into a theatre show and we start selling tickets. In a nutshell, that's what I'm trying to do. So how do you do that? And then what are the right teams to bring in to implement? It's probably 2 hours.
You've essentially gone, what I would like is an ARG and what I'd like in it, and then kind of explain an ARG. So yeah, that sounds very much what you'd want to say. I mean, yeah, it depends. I mean, if we're talking like story and nuts and bolts, that's a whole other angle, and everyone would probably have to leave because we'll be chatting for a while. But then the other is, I guess, finding your core base. I mean, I don't want to get up. There's a slide on here which is taken from The Sims. Okay, so this Sims community thing is really fascinating because they found the casual player were loads because it's freaking Sims. But what they found was these storyteller people here was about 20,000. So one thing they did in Sims 2 was that you could take screen grabs and share them. You can make them into little like stories. So what they found was it took only sometimes as little as 20, sometimes the most is like 100 or so people, which, because it had a little view bar, to say that these people were watching their story meant that they suddenly started becoming like non-stop storytellers non-stop. So as you're talking about, you've got your die-hard fan base, and then there's the other way of it coming out. If I was going to help build your ARG, and I was chatting about this with someone before as well, because they were saying they liked alternative reality games. If you look at the people who like, it's all the thing with like game reviewers. Look at the people who go through it and play it, and people watch the walkthrough playthrough videos. They'll have like thousands upon thousands of views, but sometimes your core base might only be a few hundred. So it would be a way of getting that initial fan base and they would actually go out doing whatever, but from a marketing perspective, making sure that was all recorded, and you can't have in-game and in-character a way of summarising what happened at the end of the week. That would get you more players in, but also in the same kind of scalability would help with people who might not want to go to the middle of Trafalgar Square, but it would then invigorate the ones who would.
It's like about opening up that narrative and that storyline. Because I've been working with Richard Kelly, who's the original writer and director, right? And I didn't realize that he'd written prequel stories and then There's other movies coming after it, et cetera, et cetera. So there's like so much of that universe to dive into.
The idea of world building, which is where we end up with in most of these things, when ARGs are about a world that you hope people want to go play in, right? You're hoping that we can do that. The thing that has to keep that lore, that history, that background, and keeping track of all that is one of the reasons we wrote the software, because you've got a lot of story to tell. And you want people to take it all at one time, and especially the way you're describing, which I think is really valid, right? If you've got a very expensive theater production, which has a lot of, and you want people paying attention to being in it. I'm going to one next week. I'm super excited to go to the Rumble in the Jungle next week, and that's an amazing story with tons of background. The thing I'm really would have been interested in doing is I want to start that as soon as I bought my ticket, right? I want to visit that world.
Yeah.
I want to go back and I want to go. And so I want to be in 1998 when I buy my ticket for that. And I want a reason to go and visit that story. And so those are opportunities to bring them up. There's a concept in museums, and they call them streakers, strollers, and scholars, are the phrase that they use. Streakers start off an experience. If you've ever been in a museum, they're like, I'm running through this. I've been to see the Picasso and I've clicked all the boxes. I'm out. I'm done. They just go right through it. The strollers are the ones who are open to finding an experience that's happening right now, and they're open to like seeing what's. And then there's the scholars who are like, I'm here. I know exactly what version and what tennis shoes he was wearing in scene 27, and they want to know everything. You're doing experiences for all three of those people. You want people to be able to go through your experience all the way through and still have a good time. That's the whole steel thread has to be there. You want people who are open to going it, and then you want the freaking hardcore nerds who are going to go deep. And building that's hard. I mean, I don't see how you do it without technology, frankly. I think it's really difficult to do without having some kind of database or some kind of schema. If you didn't see Sophie's talk earlier about diagrams and data, you have to diagram these things, right? You have to draw the boxes and arrows. I used to tell my kids for a long time, that's all I do for a living. I draw boxes and arrows. Because that's what you're doing, right? You're figuring out what the experience is going to be, and you can say, there's a couple of them, then you can twist it, you can tweak it, you can mess with it.
Hey, I'm Sarah Bryn. Thanks so much for the really cool presentation. If you have like a QR code so we can see those slides later, that would be awesome.
Sweet.
But for some of us who have worked on ARGs, many of us might agree that ARGs are cool as hell, and also they are loss leaders, unfortunately, a lot of the time. A loss leader means a project that is cool but often loses money. And so
A creative project.
yeah, and so one of the ways that I try to work around that is kind of, you think about a player funnel, right? And so then you have like a big mediagenic kind of public spectacle, and then we know that over time player behavior is going to narrow, and then you really need those like core group of nerds who are going to like be solving those puzzles every day. But for those of when you're on the business side of that, like how do you like to tell the story to your client about how they're getting ROI?
You have to make it cheaper for everyone to play first. I 100% agree with what you're saying here. That's actually one of the challenges. So what I tell people is, don't do any of the production until you know this works. Playtesting is not just when you're at the end and you're like, does this work? Is the concept right? So when you're in that iterate phase, you're figuring out what your concept is, playtest the shit out of the concept. That's a horizontal playtest. Then you're in the middle iterative phase. Now you're playtesting the shit out of a vertical mechanic, and you're figuring out which ones are not working. And then when it's launched, you're finding out where people got lost, right? So you're always playtesting all the way across this whole thing. So the way you do that is don't spend any money on production until you know this is going to work. And take them through it, right? Storyboard it for people. This is another thing I'm trying not, I don't want to sell Fictioneers to you, but come talk to me about that. We're trying to figure out how to storyboard faster, right? How do you make it cheaper to make someone understand the way the story is going to go, so they can see it and go, this is what we're after. This is what we're trying to achieve. And once we have that storyboard, now let's talk about what we spend money on. Because if you do that before, you're throwing money out, right? I mean, anyone who's ever devised something knows it's the things that happen in the last hour when you finally got something. And that only happens when you play test. The guys from Coney said this earlier, like, get out, play test with the people who are going to use it. It's the most important thing you do in these things. You have to play test.
Yeah. And just as well, it would be deciding if you're doing ARG, which is, we're OG old people, we know about the old school ARGs. Those would be an entire campaign and people aren't quite sure. Or it is coming from the ground that it's onboarding, which would be slightly different. It might be a bit smaller, but actually it's your initiation phase. If someone's buying the ticket and then they get a little ARG, that might probably be better sell, so to speak, because you're going, this will actively give them the skill set / get them ready to play within your world. So that's how I'd market.
I'm going to say something else about cost and money for a second too. From when we got the money from the UK government, let's do everything. Let's play with it. Let's go. It was great. If I were doing it with my money, it would have been a tenth as small. right? And I would have been more focused on less AR and less VR and more audio, more text, more images. This is a fantastic VR machine. The best AR and VR tool we have right now is a pair of great headphones. So much cheaper to do. Do them, learn from those, and then you can add some other stuff on. Let's spice it. But we put in, come look at it. It's amazing. It's beautiful. The Aardman guys have done a great job. But the number of people who saw those 197 amazing AR cutscenes and the return on investment, thank God the government was paying for it. It's the short version.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
I would love to know your thoughts on pacing and sort of staggering that storytelling, because it's such an unusual way of getting a story. And obviously, in an immersive theatre experience, you're there from the beginning to the end, but you may not make it to the end of this. General thoughts in terms of pacing and how you deliver that narrative.
This is it. This go back to my weird magic background. Let's take, I do more mind reading stuff, but let's take like a card trick, right? As everyone's like, pick a card, well, there's the card, right? That's essentially every card trick under the sun. But what you've got to do is make someone give a shit. And essentially, this is the thing with alternative reality games, is it's getting that excitement over the liveness of it. The idea that there might be a puzzle to solve, or you can do it with people, and then obviously fit in the narrative so it makes sense. If you're defusing a bomb, you solve a puzzle, it's like, great, come back at Friday in 3 weeks' time. It doesn't really make sense. But if you're putting that within the narrative, the well done team, you'll get a next quest soon. Hopefully creates that repeatability. Tension's another big thing. And there's whole story elements to it as well. But yeah, or it's like this today. There's one today here now. It's that scarcity, which probably means you want to play it. But yeah. But making sure you actually give a crap right from the get-go, and that's why a lot of stories immersive whatever is like someone's in danger, needs your help, or someone needs, because hopefully if you're an empathetic human being and the character's interesting enough, you want to continue.
I think it depends on your audiences too.
Yeah,
in knowing that you've got multiple audiences, and someone else was talking about this earlier than the slide that Thomas just showed too, the different types of players you have. Find out the types of players and audiences you have and figure out you have to pace them all differently. You really do. And that's just what I meant about those streakers, strollers, and scholars, right? You're going to have some people who have the patience to go through the whole thing with an ARG, and you got the branches. You have to have those branches for those folks. You don't need as many as you think. First of all, I think one of the things we're trying to do is make it so you can add them later. If it's successful, go back and add them. Don't start off with that many. And there's not, that best thing about digital storytelling is we can keep adding to it, right? You can add another web page. You can add more stuff to this if you want to. I'd like to see us do more episodics for that way. Let's start off with the story. And if you really dig this, let's do a string of pearls, not one diamond, right? Let's do a series of things. But I do think you have to recognize that people will go at different paces through your story. And so we allow people to skip to the second 5 or 6 branches so they can get through. And that is the concept behind a branch and bottleneck interactive story, right? You bring people out, you let people explore as much as they want, but you bring them back to the points they have to hit. You go out, you come back, you go out, you come back.
This is really lame, but I'm going to tell everyone. We've got kind of a secret in-house rule at Botwire, which is what we call the Simpsons method, right? So Simpsons is great. You can be a bit hungover, you can be whatever, and you can just put on the Simpsons. You can get something out of it. But if you're like a big film nerd, you can rewatch the same episode and be like, oh, that's a Hitchcock reference, that's a blah reference, So yeah, create an experience. And this is why ARGs can be a bit weird, where they can just leave you for months, and that might not be the best for what you want to do. But create an experience where people could go through it, but also having space there to validate the die-hard players. I guess it's that balancing act as well.
And catch-up mechanisms too, right? You haven't played for a while, and that was an important part for us, is understanding that people I forgot about it for a week, and how do I catch up? How do I catch up? How do I click through? How do I see what I've missed? And that's a mechanism you have to build into the experience, which with digital you can do. You can't do at a theater.
And you can do influence stuff like reciprocity and lots of other marketing things. Do you remember like Farmville? They were great for that, right? 1 cow today, log in tomorrow, you get 2 cows. It works.
Thank you, guys. That really, really interesting. I would just add to your question, diagramming. I think that can help with the rhythm of the piece. Matthew, you mentioned, these rules of engagement and this session 0. And I was just wondering, from both of your opinions, can you have different rules of engagement over different forms? Because what we're talking here, it's transmedia storytelling in many ways, isn't it? And in your experience, 100%. Do you feel like you have to have that one set of rules to unlock everyone, to get everyone in the right zone? Or actually, what about these multiple touch points of different rules of engagement?
Have anyone in this room played Werewolf or seen The Traitors, the TV show? You know what I'm talking about, the game we're talking about? So that's an uneven information game. The bad guys know that they're the bad guys. They're trying to tell the good guys, and most of the good guys. So you can actually have two different sets of rules on a digital story, right? You can say this: if you're playing as this role, you have these rules, and that creates a lot of interesting dynamics and changing, and also create story and tension in your experience. So you could say the rules for this group is X, and the rules for these people are Y, and that creates the tension in your story, which could be a very powerful way to do that. So I do think that if you're going to tell a linear story or a story that branches out, the more agency they have, the more time you have to spend on the rules. The more you give them choices, the more ways you have to be able to say that here's how you can use them. Otherwise, it's no longer, you won't have the pacing, you won't have anything. I do think you're going to have different rules, but it really depends on the kind of experience you're making.
I think that's the thing, is it's especially with immersive, what you don't want to punish creativity. That's why I bring up that weird thing where they're like, it was a bunch of dog pics, and they went, yeah, that's fine with me. It's as we were saying before, you don't want the actor to be punched if they're dressed as a boxer, but at the same time, if it's a room where you can do anything, you can do nothing at all. So I think it is talking about different player styles, is talking about people can respond differently to it. I mean, essentially, if you're looking at like writing theory, right, is a character wants something and then there's obstacles in the way, and what they do to solve those obstacles makes them the character they are, except you're the character. So I guess it's creating obstacles, showing you ways that you can solve it, but being kind of buoyant enough that, or kind of rewarding the player enough if they go left rather than right, but they still get around that obstacle.
I think it's also really interesting if you ask your players what they want to do and find out if you've got players who you can give more rules to or different rules to, right? You all have that friend who took you like to immersive theater thing who knows freaking everything about the show. They're like, I've been to Punch Drunk 75 times and I know exactly where this happens. That's one type of person, right? And they love to have that knowledge and experience it and share it with everybody else they're going with. The other person is like, I'm here for the bar. I'm here for whatever those people dress, that's fine. I'm here for the bar. Recognizing you have both those people and giving them different sets of rules can be a really strong way to move people through your experience.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, this one's going back to the ROI question that you asked, actually. And I just wondered if you guys had ever done this or thought about it. Just curious if you've ever put in transactional moments into the games. So what I mean is like creating like another revenue stream. So having a merch shop in there, being able to sell like a secret space for the event when they get there, or like in narrative kind of opportunities to buy in narrative products or services, that type of thing.
The Big Fix-Up had a bunch of things you could buy. There was a merch component to it. I will tell you that went flat pretty fast, right? Just to be really upfront with you and say that wasn't partially because we couldn't spend some of that lovely government money on marketing, so we didn't really market it. We hit during the pandemic. There's a bunch of reasons that it didn't work. I do think there's opportunity to upgrade your game, right? I think, I don't know if you've done Secret Cinema and you've given a role in Secret Cinema and they let you buy some stuff in advance. I think that's been great. I don't think we've gone nearly as far as that should go. There's a lot of opportunity to let people level up. It's one of the mechanisms of most mobile games right now is free to play, but buy stuff to go faster.
And it's how you do it, right?
And ethically, and I mean, there's an ethics side to that too, right? I mean, my 13-year-old buying stuff on Fortnite, I have some words for Epic Games, right? There's definitely some challenges there. But at the same time, I also realize that that's how some people want to play. That has been the business model for free to play and mobile for a long time, you know, and some of it's some of it's very cosmetic. It doesn't change your story at all. It's like, wear a costume, wear a hat. It's pretty cool.
I think it's the starting point as well. I guess if you did do an ARG and it was 6 months long and then halfway through the third month in, you're like, and now to continue, you must, it's your motivation. But yeah, if it was an extension, for example, just building a little like 1 to 2 web page little puzzle thing, which if you solved, you then got like I think they did that with, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole of how that crashed and burned, but the whole Galactic Star Cruiser, Star Wars thing, there were certain quests which if you unlocked meant you could get certain pins and stuff from the merch stand. So that's another way that could be done. So you've got your merch store, but then, because the great thing about that is if it's a special t-shirt which they get for solving a quest, they probably want to buy it because they solved the quest and they want to remember it. But then everyone's like, I've been and never saw that, and they go, oh, you got your word of mouth, you got your
Check Wikipedia and look up Perplexity, the one of the original ARG games. Was an interesting one that failed and was about 10 years ago. It's on, if you actually look up ARGs in Wikipedia, great page. We'll put a link to it.
Yeah, we'll add it to it.
On this QR code, if you grab this QR code, we're going to add a bunch of links to the end of this. We'll put the links to the talks.
Yeah, all sorts of stuff in there.
So grab that and we'll add to that over the next hour or so, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But I would say if you look at some of what's happened in ARGs, know your history. know which ones worked, which ones didn't, and most of them have failed. Like the loss leader thing, most of them have not been successful. I think they're coming back because of the technology. As we can drive the costs down, they're going to become more and more interesting. And like what Thomas did, like just did it from forms, and you don't need to have all the bells and whistles to make these things work.
And as you said, with the gaming, it could be like a kind of your DLC element and because that's another thing as well, is if you give it out as like a bit of a free experience, or kind of this is what we can do on low to no budget, and then there's a thing at the end which goes, and this second quest, we need some money off, and it can be in character. It's a tongue-in-cheek thing, but they know that it's the creator going, look, I've got a new quest, would you mind paying for it? And if they've given you a free experience already, people might, it all depends.
So I was talking with my creative producer the other day, and she actually worked on the Institute with Nonchalant, and we were talking about an ARG that I've got in sort of early stage development, and she was saying, I don't think Jeff wants to do any more ARGs. I was like, why? And she said, well, because there were people who thought they were being stalked. There were people who really flipped out because of the reality bending thing that they did with that project. And I just found myself saying, I think it's, and I'm curious what your take is on this. I kind of feel like as an industry, it's so young still. It's not like in the cinema where you go into the lobby, you buy your popcorn, you get a ticket, you slowly in stages suspend disbelief, and then you sit in the dark theater, and then okay, I'm in the movies, whatever happens next. But then we were talking about how, back in the day when people first went into a movie theater and they saw a train coming towards them, they didn't know that it was not going to hit them. How do we find, is there any blueprint for the ethics? Yeah.
You're just describing trust. This is where brands have value, right? If you say, look, I'm coming to a brand, if you're playing the Monopoly ARG, you're pretty sure things are going to go a certain way. You know the rules of the game. And this is what I mean by like, it's as much as I do love, I was a huge Nine Inch Nails fan. And so I loved Year Zero. That was fully on brand for Trent Reznor. That was exactly the world he was going to make for me. I knew what I was getting into. If you take me someplace and you scare the shit out of me and I haven't earned that trust, and that's why I spend some time on session zero, with the idea of you have to build up the trust with your audience, whoever it is, with your brand, and especially if you're thinking about brand stuff, right? You definitely don't want to surprise people with your brand. And if your brand has values, then you want to make sure you're staying to those. You don't want some place in which they can go in and mess around and cause things that are bad or manipulate. So you almost have to red team these things, right? The phrase red team, where you go in and try to break it, you have to do that with these in part of your playtesting too. It's like if people are getting scared or upset because you did it wrong. Unless that was your goal.
I would liken that to sort of trying to do like a live immersive horror experience. And actually scare attractions actually is a whole branch of scare. You should go and see some scare attraction stuff, because they are very good at going, well, you guys want to be scared. So you're going to come in and we're going to fulfill that need and then some. But because it's us, you trust us, and you know that, you're not going to die, but you're going to enjoy the process of thinking you're going to die. It's lost on me, but it sounds great. But it kind of feels like that's the ARG relationship that you need to sort of build, isn't it? Because I mean, when we were sort of playing around with our stuff in lockdown, we were talking with the guys who made Spooks and talking about them about, wouldn't it be great if we could do some sort of online digital game of Spooks? And it would be great if you could get people to sort of sign up for it and say, yeah, I want to be really sort of properly immersed in this story, and I want to be really deep dive, and I know it's you guys, but I want to be, I want to be on the edge. Then give them the very best version of that, and I think they're really. Because you always got the option to opt out. You always got like the safe word of like closing your browser or thing like that. But I think that's where that onboarding and that sort of consent bit is so the game is working out how best to do that in a meaningful, ideally in narrative way, and then just delivering on exactly what they've asked you to do. And if that's to give them a real sort of like edgy ride through, is this real, is this not real, then lean into it.
Yeah. Also, in a weird way, you can't please everyone, because the diehard ARG people want to find ARG out in the wild and be like, I found this link and I found whatever, and they won't play it. And the one person who does play it happens to be like, I don't know, well, let's throw shade, like QAnon was an ARG that went off the rails. Like, you know what I mean? There's enough, there's some really interesting articles that look at that. Like, can you ever win when you're trying to go, no, this is real? This is, I remember someone pranked my mate I hid a bunch of speakers around the room and was playing like horror music. And it got to the point she was like, Tom, I've got work in the morning. This has been too... And I was like, there's none left. And she's like, you're telling me that because there's one... And like, the more I said that this wasn't going to happen, the more that... And that sometimes is once you go to that far, Yeah, and that's the thing with when we're talking ARGs as before shows and like as a show itself, and what you're kind of talking about, which is like you want to throw it on a Reddit somewhere and hope it blows up. So that's kind of a different kind of audience. So it's hard to navigate. But yeah.
Thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it. Hope that was useful.